The sky split open like a torn sheet of metal. Bright lights, unnatural and sharp, poured through the clouds. Every television, every screen, every signal was hijacked. A voice, deep and metallic, spoke in 27 languages at once. "We are the Dominion fleet of the Zathari Empire. Surrender your planet or face extinction." On a dusty street in Arizona, an old man sipped his coffee and raised an eyebrow. "Damn kids and their alien prank calls," he muttered. But it wasn't a prank. The fleet hung in orbit, massive and silent, a wall of metal and death blocking out the stars. Earth's governments panicked. Military forces mobilized. World leaders scrambled for answers. The Vatican issued prayers. China readied nukes. America activated its Space Defense Command, a program so secret even the president had to Google it. But something strange happened. Instead of mass panic, riots, or global terror, the general response from the population, especially the men on the ground, was laughter. Not nervous laughter, not denial. Actual, unfiltered, belly-aching laughter. One clip went viral within minutes. A man in Detroit, wearing nothing but boxers and a beer hat, flipping off the alien ships and yelling, "Come down here, bitches! We got pit bulls and Bud Light!" Reddit exploded with memes. TikTok was flooded with parody videos of Zathari aliens getting whooped by middle-aged dads with lawn chairs. #Welcome Zathari trended globally. It wasn't fear, it was defiance, wrapped in sarcasm, and served with a side of dark humor. Commander Kelthax of the Zathari watched Earth's reaction from his flagship. His eyes, black and lidless, blinked slowly. "They're laughing." His communications officer, a junior Zathari barely past hatching age, hesitated. "It appears so, Commander. Our threats are being mocked, turned into entertainment." Kelthax stood, tall and lean, his armor reflecting the stars behind him. "That is not the reaction of a civilized species. That is madness." Another officer chimed in. "Perhaps they are too primitive to understand the gravity of our arrival?" "No," Kelthax said, narrowing his eyes. "They understand, and they don't care." Down on Earth, Colonel Jack Merrick stood on the roof of the Pentagon, hands in his pockets, chewing gum like he didn't have a care in the world. A lifetime soldier, scars on his knuckles and war in his bones, he'd seen enough to know one truth. Fear is power. But what he saw in the eyes of his men, and all over the internet, wasn't fear. It was something else. Resentment, amusement, and under it all, a smoldering hunger. "We ain't afraid of you," he muttered, staring at the ships overhead. "Not because we're stupid, but because we've already seen hell, and this ain't it." His phone buzzed, a text from an old war buddy. "They expect fear. Let's give them American chaos instead." Jack smiled. Far away in orbit, the Zathari prepared for their next phase. Standard procedure. A small-scale show of force. A city, perhaps. Destroyed from orbit to demonstrate capability. Classic psychological dominance. It worked on hundreds of worlds. But not here. Because they didn't understand Earth yet. They didn't understand the kind of people who found comedy in the face of death, who made jokes in foxholes, who turned mass invasions into stand-up routines. They didn't understand humans. But they were about to. 36 hours after the broadcast, the Zathari fleet moved into Phase 2, a standard protocol known across the galaxy as Demonstration of Absolute Dominance. For every species they had ever encountered, it worked flawlessly. The plan was simple. Erase a city. One strike. Quick, clean, total. No warnings, no discussions. The message would be clear: submit or vanish. Every civilization so far had chosen submission. The city selected was Johannesburg, not because it was strategic, not because it was a threat. It was chosen because it was loud, defiant, culturally rich, and globally visible. The Zathari algorithms had concluded that hitting such a center would break the morale of humans with maximum efficiency. They didn't factor in rage or trauma, or the way humans bottle pain until it explodes in the worst way imaginable. From orbit, the superweapon warmed up. The ship's hull glowed a faint blue as energy gathered from across space-time dimensions, funneled into a beam capable of turning solid rock into vapor. Zathari engineers boasted this weapon had reduced a planet's entire northern hemisphere into molten glass once. It never got to fire. Colonel Jack Merrick was already in the air by then, not with an army, not with a fleet. Just 3 modified Blackbird stealth crafts, flying so low under detection it looked like birds on radar. But they weren't carrying nukes. They carried payloads far more dangerous. Code. Earth had been preparing for war since the Cold War era, always imagining Russia, China, or some rogue nuclear state. But a few black-budget programs had been preparing for something else. Project Harpy, run out of a hidden facility in Nevada, had developed a virus, digital warfare designed not to destroy alien systems, but to confuse them, jam their protocols, muddle communications, turn every yes into a no, and every targeting sequence into a request for coffee. When the beam was about to fire, it simply didn't. The weapon turned inward, then back out, then asked for authorization from parent. Confusion spread across the Zathari command. Commander Kelthax stood before the holographic screen, watching his weapon disobey orders. "What is this?" he growled. "Sir," the engineer stammered, "we're being rerouted. Our system is experiencing a feedback loop from an unknown external signal. The code is laughing." Kelthax turned slowly. "Did you say the code is laughing?" "Yes, Commander. It repeats one phrase over and over. You ever been rickrolled?" There was silence on the bridge. Then static, then a grainy Earth voice, distorted but clear, echoed through their systems. "Never gonna give you up? Never gonna let you down?" The flagship's systems were hijacked. A meme, a 1980s song, an Earth joke weaponized into cyber infiltration. The Zathari had been rickrolled. Commander Kelthax crushed the edge of his console with one clawed hand. "Purge it! Wipe it from all systems!" "We can't, sir. It's everywhere. It's spreading faster than we can isolate it." Down on Earth, Jack Merrick watched from a secure military bunker in Virginia. He sipped black coffee, still in his flight suit, bruised from the high G maneuvering. But he was smiling. General Roth, a bull-necked bastard who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade, turned to Jack and asked, "You really think memes are going to win us a war?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He looked at the monitors, footage of people in New York dancing in the streets under the glow of alien ships, kids in Seoul holding up signs saying, "Come get some," and a group of mechanics in rural Texas welding armor plates onto a school bus with the words "Galactic Welcome Wagon" painted in spray paint on the side. "No," Jack finally said, "but they'll buy us time and make them hesitate." General Roth folded his arms. "We need to hit them, hard. Show them this rock bites back." "We will," Jack said, "but we hit smart, not just hard." Up in orbit, Zathari morale cracked. Not from casualties. They'd suffered none. Not from damage. Earth had done little. But it was the unpredictability, the insanity. Commander Kelthax knew control. He understood discipline, fear, submission. But Earth wasn't responding with any of those. It was responding like an animal that didn't know how to die properly, like it had seen too much, lost too much, and now had nothing left to give but defiance. "We underestimated them," he admitted quietly. He called an emergency war council. Dozens of fleet captains gathered in the chamber, each projecting from their own ships. The debate was bitter. "They are primitive," one captain argued. "They use memes as weapons." "That's precisely the problem," another countered. They weaponize everything: humor, grief, madness. We can't predict them. They cannot be controlled. Kelthax stood above them all, silent, then raised a hand for calm. This planet is not like the others. They don't break the same way. They don't beg. They provoke. They taunt. They laugh. He paused, then said what no Zathari leader had said in centuries. We may need to retreat and re-strategize. Gasps, murmurs. One captain shouted, "Retreat? Against humans?" But the decision hung in the air like a blade. The humans had made the Zathari doubt themselves, and in war, that's more dangerous than any bullet. On Earth, the news spread fast. The fleet was stalling. Satellite photos showed ships pulling back into defensive patterns, their formations loose and confused. World governments were still on edge, but people weren't waiting anymore. Resistance cells formed. Not underground movements, public ones. Bars turned into war rooms. Gun stores ran dry. Neighborhood dads held tactical training sessions in backyards. Hackers built tools to ping alien frequencies with baby cries and goat screams. An entire radio station in Iowa began broadcasting nothing but bagpipes and screaming goats on loop into space. Colonel Jack Merrick was flown to Berlin next, where global leaders gathered to coordinate an offensive response. He walked into the room smelling of jet fuel and sweat, and nobody dared question his authority. They expected us to roll over, Jack told the crowd. They thought their size, their tech, their arrogance would be enough. But they don't get it. We're not the strongest species. We're not the smartest. But damn if we aren't the meanest when cornered. We fight with everything. Rage, spite, humor, grief. They don't have a file for that. One French general stood up. What do you propose? Jack leaned forward. We hit them with what they don't understand. Chaos. The operation was codenamed Mockingbird. Not a single fleet. Not a united strike. Instead, hundreds of random, small-scale attacks. Not coordinated. Not conventional. Guerrilla warfare in orbit, code infiltrations, propaganda drops, even laser-projecting memes onto Zathari hulls mid-space battle. One drone projected a giant image of a middle finger with the caption, "You mad, bro?" right before exploding against a carrier. A captured Zathari officer screamed during interrogation, "Your species is insane!" And maybe he was right. Maybe that's what made humans so terrifying. Not power, not numbers, but the refusal to ever behave the way you expect. Because when you come to intimidate a man who's already lost everything, who's been broken and rebuilt by war, poverty, betrayal, and death, and he laughs in your face, that's when you know you're in trouble. Commander Kelthax stood at the edge of his command deck, looking down at the swirling blue planet below. He clenched his fists, claws digging into his palm. "They're not soldiers," he whispered. "They're demons in skin." He thought of retreating again. But deep inside, something darker stirred. He wasn't just going to destroy Earth now, he was going to break it. No more warnings, no more tactics, just raw, burning annihilation. What he didn't realize is that the moment he chose that path, Earth had already won. Because once you decide to fight a people who laugh at genocide with middle fingers and memes, you've already stepped into their world. And in that world, madness reigns. Commander Kelthax no longer cared about protocols. No more war councils. No more measured strategies. The humans had made him look like a fool before the entire empire, and that could not go unanswered. He wanted Earth reduced to ash. The command went out. Planetary sterilization. It was a war crime by galactic standards. But Kelthax didn't care about laws anymore. He didn't care about optics or strategy. He wanted humanity to suffer, to beg for mercy. The fleet aligned. Hundreds of orbital weapons began to charge. This time the humans wouldn't have time to joke. This time the skies would fall. But the humans had been watching. And waiting. Colonel Jack Merrick wasn't in a bunker or boardroom anymore. He was on the front lines now. somewhere off-grid in Utah, inside a camouflaged control center buried deep under a mountain. The place had no name, just a designation: Black Nest. Jack stood before a wall of screens, each one showing a different angle of the approaching fleet. He rubbed his stubbled jaw. The lines around his eyes were darker now. His voice had gone rougher over the last week. Less colonel, more survivor. A young technician beside him spoke. "Sir, they're arming every ship. Full burn. They're not playing anymore." Jack didn't blink. "Good." The technician hesitated. "Sir?" "Means they're scared. You don't drop a nuke on a mosquito unless the damn thing bit you in the eye." Around them, Black Nest came alive. Not with soldiers, though there were a few, but with outcasts. Men and women who'd been thrown out of polite society. Coders too dangerous for tech firms. Engineers too stubborn to follow safety protocols. Psychopaths who found a home where war was not just tolerated, but required. One of them, a bearded man with tattoos of circuit boards running down both arms, turned from his console. "Operation Wasp's Nest is ready." Jack looked at him. "Deploy." Operation Wasp's Nest wasn't a counterattack in the traditional sense. It was Earth's purest form of retaliation. Chaos, noise, aggression, and the element of total unpredictability. In low orbit, hundreds of Earth-made satellites and defunct space junk exploded into high-velocity debris. Not aimed, not guided, just blasted into Zathari formations like shrapnel from a cosmic shotgun. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't precise. It was brutal. One Zathari cruiser lost its stabilizers and spun out of control, crashing into another ship. The rest of the fleet panicked. AI systems couldn't calculate the debris paths fast enough. It was like trying to dodge a hurricane made of knives. But that was just the start. From Black Nest, Earth's rogue hacker squads launched a digital storm, code viruses mimicking Zathari software, but warped, looped to turn commands into nonsense, drain power cells, and flood ship communications with Earth's most vile online content. One Zathari commander collapsed screaming after watching 30 hours of unfiltered human internet rage. They didn't understand the horror of Reddit until it was in their minds. They didn't understand fortune. They sure as hell didn't understand Florida Man. Kelthax roared from the bridge of his ship as lights flickered and systems glitched. One screen showed a dancing cat with a Pop-Tart body. Another displayed a man eating cereal while his house burned down. Messages blinked. "Welcome to Earth. Population, fuck around and find out." He grabbed his lead technician by the throat. "Shut it down!" "We're trying, Commander. The signal keeps mutating. Every fix spawns 3 more issues." Kelthax threw the corpse aside. He looked at Earth again. Not with fear. With hatred. "Prepare the core cannon." The crew froze. "But Commander, that weapon will rupture their atmosphere. It'll—" "I said prepare it!" The Zathari flagship opened its maw. The core cannon had only ever been fired twice in history. Both times it had sterilized continents. It was a last resort, a forbidden relic from the early days of the Empire. Kelthax didn't care. Down on Earth, Jack Merrick received the signal. His team decrypted the frequency. It was real. "They're prepping the core cannon," a woman whispered. Jack stood still, staring at the screen. "They're going to try and burn the air right out of the sky." Silence fell. Then Jack nodded. "Time to bring in the Mad Dog." There were names spoken only in hushed tones in the military, legends whispered in bars, never officially recognized. One of them was Marcus Mad Dog Rain. A dishonorably discharged ex-pilot, Rain had a record of insubordination, reckless flying, and a kill count that shouldn't have been possible. He was last seen flying prototype spacecraft in the Mojave, until he disappeared. Jack had found him, hidden in a trailer half drunk, half mad, building weapons from scrap. "You still fly?" Jack had asked him weeks ago. Rain had grinned with bloodshot eyes. "Only if I can die doing it." Now, the call came through. A launch ramp opened beneath Black Nest. Rain's ship, the Iron Howl, rocketed into the sky. It wasn't pretty. It looked like a junkyard had made love to a missile. But it was fast. And more importantly, Rain didn't care about surviving. He flew straight for the flagship. Zathari gunners didn't even fire. The ship was so small, so fast, their systems couldn't lock. It was like trying to hit a fly with a railgun. Inside the cockpit, Rain laughed. It was a sick, animal noise. He screamed into the radio, "Come on, you space lizards, let's dance!" He broke through the flagship's hangar bay. Explosions followed. Zathari soldiers swarmed the interior, but they were too slow. Rain had rigged his ship with charges, turning it into a flying bomb. He bailed out mid-flight, crashed through a window, landed on the deck like a wild beast. He pulled out 2 plasma pistols, Earth-modified, and screamed, "Welcome to Planet Crazy!" The flagship erupted in chaos. Rain fought like a man who had already died years ago. Meanwhile, Jack watched from Black Nest. "He's in." General Roth's voice came through a secure channel. "Are you serious? You sent Rain? He's a lunatic." Jack grinned. "Exactly." On board the flagship, Rain reached the core cannon room. It was sealed tight. No codes, no override. So he strapped charges to the door and kicked back, lighting a cigarette as the timer ticked down. When it blew, he walked through the smoke like the devil himself, bleeding, laughing, limping, but still moving. He threw a grenade into the core controls. The cannon began to overload. Kelthax felt the ship tremble. "Number no, shut it down!" But it was too late. The cannon exploded inward, ripping through the flagship's underbelly. A chain reaction followed. Fire bloomed in orbit. The flagship broke apart in 3 loud cracks that echoed through the void. Rain, somehow still alive, ejected into low orbit, laughing as debris burned around him. Back on Earth, the night sky lit up with fireballs. Zathari ships broke formation. Their leader was gone. Their systems were corrupted. Their morale was shattered. Across the globe, people saw the explosions and cheered. In bar rooms and shelters and underground bunkers, humans roared with laughter. Not because the war was over, but because they'd proven something. You don't scare the kind of people who turn apocalypse into entertainment. You don't dominate a race whose greatest strength is refusing to break. And you sure as hell don't invade Earth expecting order, logic, or sanity. Because down here, we don't fight fair. We fight furious. And sometimes, we fight funny. The flagship's wreckage scattered across low orbit like confetti from the funeral of a tyrant. Flames trailed behind broken pieces of once impenetrable Zathari armor as they plummeted toward Earth's atmosphere, burning up in streaks of cosmic justice. In the silence that followed, Earth didn't celebrate with speeches or military parades. It roared. In the ruins of São Paulo, survivors danced around the fires of destroyed Zathari drones. In Moscow, people raised vodka bottles to the sky and toasted to the mad pilot who died like a legend. In small-town America, kids painted spaceships on school walls, each one drawn exploding with cartoonish glee. But the war wasn't over. Not even close. Jack Merrick sat alone in a dark room within Black Nest, staring at the glowing data streams on the wall. His body ached. Age, exhaustion, and fury fighting for space inside his bones. A cup of black coffee steamed untouched in his hand. His eyes weren't on the fleet anymore. They were on the ground. Because now, the real invasion had begun. The Zathari might have lost their flagship, but they hadn't retreated. Instead, they doubled down. Drop pods, thousands of them, rained down on every continent like metallic hail. They didn't land in neat formations. They didn't try diplomacy. They simply smashed into cities, towns, even rural forests, like viruses injected into the veins of the planet. And each one contained Zathari ground units, brutal, efficient, and genetically engineered for war. Earth's skies might have held, but the ground was now a meat grinder. Jack's comms erupted with chaos. Multiple landings in Africa. Cape Town's under siege. Zathari units spotted moving through the Alps, Europe's coordinating defense. Sir, we lost all contact with Boston. Every continent became a battlefield overnight. And unlike the space war, Earth couldn't meme its way out of this one. It had to fight. Old school, blood and bullets. The drop in New Mexico landed in a remote town called Dust Ridge. Population? 817. The Zathari probably picked it thinking it'd be easy. Quiet, weak, something they could flatten on their way to bigger targets. They didn't know Dust Ridge had a bar called the Scorched Boot, and in that bar was a man named Hank Grady, Vietnam vet, ex-bounty hunter, known for punching out a bear once in Alaska after the bastard bit his dog. He'd been sitting in that bar when the drop pod smashed through Main Street. Everyone ran. Hank stood. He poured one last whiskey, took one last sip, then walked out into the dust with a sawed-off in each hand. Zathari troopers, 9 feet tall, armored like tanks, emerged from the pod, scanning the area. Hank didn't wait. He fired both barrels. The buckshot barely dented their armor. One of them laughed, an awful screeching noise. Hank muttered, "Figures," and dropped the guns. Then he picked up a steel pipe and charged. Across the planet, men like Hank did the same. No military medals, no official ranks, just the forgotten, the old, the rough-edged souls who'd been through hell long before aliens ever showed up. In Ukraine, a mechanic named Victor drove his tow truck straight into a Zathari convoy, screaming, "For my babushka!" In Nigeria, a group of teenagers built homemade flamethrowers and torched 3 enemy units in a supermarket parking lot. In Chicago, ex-gang members put their differences aside and turned abandoned buildings into traps. One Zathari squad was lured into a warehouse that exploded 5 seconds after the last one stepped inside. The message painted outside said, "Humans played dirty. Welcome to Earth." Jack Merrick coordinated the chaos. He didn't try to control it. He couldn't. What he did was fuel it. Every successful ambush was shared worldwide. Every crazy tactic got amplified. The war became a viral sensation. Hashtags like Fancher Stomp the Scales and Ancha Zathari season were everywhere. Earth didn't just resist, it performed. And still, the Zathari pushed. Commander Kelthax's successor, a cold-eyed war priest named Varek, now led the ground campaign. Unlike Kelthax, Varek didn't underestimate humans. He didn't find them funny. He found them unacceptable. Varek moved with mechanical precision. He targeted power grids, food supply chains, water systems. No speeches, no threats, just methodical strangulation. He believed if humans couldn't be beaten in war, they could be starved into submission. It started working. Major cities went dark. Hospitals ran on fumes. Panic returned. But not the kind the Zathari expected. Earth didn't surrender. It fractured. Some people hoarded, some betrayed, some ran. But others adapted. In Detroit, a network of bikers began running fuel and food between towns under siege, dodging alien patrols and corrupt officials. In India, a coder named Tanveer rerouted a power grid to keep an entire hospital functioning, using nothing but scraps and code stolen from a Zathari helmet. In Kansas, a teenage girl figured out that pouring bleach into Zathari wounds caused their skin to melt like wax. That info spread like wildfire. Everyone fought. Everyone mattered. Jack Merrick moved from one zone to another, rarely sleeping, always one step ahead of collapse. One night, deep in what used to be Colorado, he met with a militia group. Ex-firefighters, lumberjacks, coal miners. One of them, a grizzled man missing 2 fingers, looked at Jack and asked, "You really think we can win this?" Jack lit a cigarette. "I don't think we have a choice." The man grunted. "Ain't the same as believing it." Jack stared at the stars through the broken roof of the cabin. "Number. But it's the same as doing it." That was enough. The men stood. Weapons were distributed. Traps were set. They weren't soldiers, but neither were they victims. Weeks passed, then months. The Zathari lost the skies. Then they lost the narrative. And now on the ground they were losing something worse, their will. They couldn't understand it. Every time they broke a region, humans reformed somewhere else. Like water, like fire, like madness. They were facing a species that didn't know how to die properly. And finally, in a ruined church in southern Italy, a Zathari warlord stood over a dying boy and asked, truly asked, "Why do you fight? You have nothing left." The boy coughed blood, smiled weakly, and whispered, "Because we're not done laughing yet." They called it the silence before the flood. After 3 months of brutal face-to-face fighting across continents, the Zathari suddenly stopped advancing. Drop pods ceased falling. Skirmishes dwindled. Their drones began flying at higher altitudes, watching, but not striking. It was like they were observing, calculating, waiting. The humans knew something was coming. Jack Merrick sat inside a bullet-scarred safe house in former Missouri, one hand gripping a blood-stained map, the other pressed to his headset. Outside, resistance fighters patrolled trenches carved into the sides of highways. Kids with rifles stood beside war veterans with missing limbs. Dogs carried med kits on their backs. Inside, Jack's voice was low, tired, and hard. "We need to prepare for a reset." On the other end of the line, a resistance leader in Australia replied, "What kind?" Jack didn't hesitate. Mass extinction. Because that's what he felt in his gut. The Zathari had tested Earth, laughed at it, fought it, lost pride, soldiers, and ships. And now they wanted a conclusion, not a victory, not domination, a purge. It began with the skies turning red. People thought it was an aurora at first, but the red wasn't natural. It wasn't beautiful. It bled from the clouds like a wound, turning day into a permanent sunset. Then came the noise. A low hum, deep and primal, vibrating through bones and buildings. It made people nauseous. Animals ran. Birds died mid-flight. Old radios caught fragments of Zathari language, pulsing words like commands broadcast directly into the air. Then came the deaths. Not from weapons, from silence. Entire towns gone. No explosions, no screams, just missing, like they'd blinked out of existence. One by one they vanished. Jack stood over a hill, binoculars in hand, watching a city disappear without a trace. No flames, no debris, just gone, like it had been erased by the universe itself. Beside him, a young scout whispered, How are they doing this?" Jack didn't know, but he knew what it meant. The Zathari weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to end everything. The weapon was called the Thought Eraser, a reality-bending device buried deep within the second-largest Zathari mothership, one that hadn't even been used during their war with the Exnol, a species of interstellar cannibals. It had never been deployed in full because it didn't just kill life. It removed memory, erased records, wiped entire histories. If Earth fell to it, it wouldn't just die. It would never have existed. But there was a flaw. The weapon had to charge through psychic resonance. It required a complete map of the target's thoughtscape, memories, behaviors, neurological patterns. For most races, this was simple. Predictable minds, rigid logic, but not humans. Human consciousness was erratic, full of contradictions. Fueled by emotions, chaos, trauma, the Zathari's mapping process kept failing. Every time they thought they had it figured out, another variable broke the system. They tried to scan a man dying of cancer. He started laughing about his ex-wife. They tried a child and got a memory of cartoon violence stitched with real grief. One report said, "They do not think. They rage, they joke, they scream, they laugh in grief and weep in victory. Their memories are not sequences. They are wildfires." But they were still close, so Earth had to act, fast. Black Nest was long gone, destroyed in a Zathari orbital strike. But the movement lived on in 100 underground hubs, connected by encrypted lines, rogue satellite networks, and blood-sworn alliances. The plan was insane. As usual, infiltrate the mothership, destroy the weapon. Not with nukes, with thought. Jack called it Operation Mindstorm. They didn't have alien-grade tech. They had pills, wires, and reckless resolve. They selected a team of 8, not the smartest, not the strongest, but the most unhinged. People whose minds would choke the Zathari sensors the moment they were scanned. One of them was a former jazz musician who had once dropped acid for 48 hours and thought he could hear thoughts in color. Another was a war widow who claimed she could see her dead husband in the mirror and spoke to him like he was still shaving beside her every morning. There was a cannibal, a schizophrenic, a man who believed the moon was following him and had written a 500-page diary to prove it. And then there was Jack. He wasn't insane, but he was the kind of man who stared at madness long enough that it started blinking first. The insertion craft was barely more than a rocket with a steering wheel. They called it the Hell Spit. Jack rode it with his team, helmets sealed, adrenaline rising. As they rose through the last layer of atmosphere, one of the team members, the jazz guy, started humming a funeral song. Jack didn't stop him. Inside the Zathari mothership, the resistance landed hard. Fire tore across the hangar. One of the team's legs snapped on impact. She ripped it off and crawled forward, screaming, "Not today, alien bastards!" They fought, hand to hand, gun to claw, blood against metal. It wasn't a stealth mission anymore. It was a statement. They wanted the Zathari to feel it, to panic. And when Jack reached the core chamber, the glowing, pulsing psychic engine, he smiled. Because it looked just like he'd hoped, alive and vulnerable. The team circled it. No bombs, no codes, just thoughts. They linked themselves to the alien machine using neural taps stitched from stolen tech and raw wires. Each one jacked in, one by one, feeding the thought eraser their minds. And Earth poured in, not logic, pain, broken childhoods, funerals and lost dogs, lovers who cheated, memories of hunger, of laughing in courtrooms where justice never came, of burying children and marching into war anyway. Every betrayal, every scream, every joke told at a funeral because there was no other way to survive. The machine buckled. Lights flickered. The chamber screamed, not with sound, but with the rage of a dying intelligence that couldn't comprehend the data it was receiving. It tried to adapt. It tried to purge. But it couldn't process madness, because humans didn't think. They felt. And the weapon choked on it. Jack's last thought before blacking out was of his father, drunk, angry, throwing a bottle at the wall, and how Jack had laughed because he didn't want to cry. The weapon shattered. It screamed one last time in a voice stolen from 1,000 minds, and then exploded inward, taking half the mothership with it. Jack didn't die. Not yet. He woke up in a hospital built inside an old casino. The war wasn't over, but it had changed. The Zathari retreated, not because they'd been beaten, but because they finally understood. Humanity wasn't a species you could map. We weren't code. We were noise, and you can't erase what you can't understand. The day the thought eraser collapsed, the stars fell silent. The mothership's explosion sent shockwaves through every Zathari broadcast frequency. Across the occupied zones of Earth, their drones paused mid-flight. Infantry units halted. Even their war AI stopped transmitting orders. The enemy was no longer pushing. They were recoiling. But for humanity, there was no time to celebrate. The cost had already been carved into the ground. The United States was split down the middle like an open wound. China had become a maze of craters and electrical storms, the fallout of scorched alien counterattacks. Africa had seen entire cities vanish, wiped from record and memory by early-stage thought eraser tests. Jack Merrick sat in a burned-out casino-turned-field hospital in the Nevada desert, his ribs still broken, lungs aching, mind frayed like a radio tuned to the edge of madness. The doctors didn't understand how he was alive. None of the team that had entered the Zathari mothership should have survived the neural overload. But Jack had, somehow. Or maybe what was left of him just refused to quit. He woke to a face he hadn't seen in years. Harper, an old CIA contact who'd gone underground after the agency splintered during the first weeks of the invasion. "Still breathing, huh?" Harper said, offering a grim smile. Jack rasped, "Depends on your definition of breathing." Harper passed him a bottle of water, then pulled a chair up to his bedside. Her voice turned low. "They're calling it a victory, you know. The collapse of the thought eraser. The Zathari retreating from orbit. You're a ghost story now. The one who broke their mind." Jack didn't smile. "It's not over." Harper nodded. "Number, it's worse." She laid out the intel. The Zathari hadn't fled. They'd regrouped. After the fall of their psychological weapon, they'd shifted to containment. They were walling off Earth. Not killing it, not leaving it, just enclosing it, like a biohazard. "Why?" Jack asked, still wheezing. Harper's face was drawn, voice flat. "They think we're a disease, one they can't understand, one that spreads through laughter, fury, and grief, one that infects." They had begun deploying a massive planetary perimeter, a barrier that stretched from the edge of low orbit to the far side of the moon. Invisible to radar, but pulsing with energy. It wasn't meant to keep humans in. It was meant to keep humanity from ever getting out. Jack sat up, pain lancing through his ribs. "They're building a cage." "No," Harper corrected. "They're building a quarantine." The news spread fast. Earth had won the battle, but lost the war. Humanity was now seen by the galaxy as unstable, dangerous, mentally contagious. The Zathari had broadcast warnings to other species. Do not engage with Earth. Their minds are corrosive. Their memories are poison. Their species is hostile to order. And the rest of the galaxy, for now, listened. Earth was isolated. And for many, the psychological toll of that realization hit harder than alien bombs ever did. In Paris, a writer jumped off the Eiffel Tower with a sign around his neck. "What good is surviving if we're never allowed to matter again?" In Tokyo, entire crowds wore headphones, pumping static, desperate to block out the residual thought waves left behind by the Zathari tech. In Texas, a man murdered his neighbor with a crowbar, screaming that he still heard alien laughter in the walls. Earth had survived annihilation only to be branded insane by the stars. Jack Merrick didn't return to command. He couldn't. His mind wasn't all there anymore. At night, he saw data streams in his dreams. Glimpses of Zathari language. Thoughts that weren't his. He had merged with their machine too deeply. Some part of his consciousness was still drifting in that network, a ghost inside a dead weapon. But he could still think, and plan, and rage. He disappeared from the hospital one morning. Walked out wearing a stolen jacket, still limping, still coughing blood. No one stopped him. The next time anyone saw him was 6 weeks later, in South America, leading a new resistance group. They didn't call it an army. They called it the Contagion, a name to mock the Zathari quarantine, to wear the insult as a badge of honor. Jack's people weren't organized. They weren't trained. They weren't clean. But they were angry, and hungry, and creative. Their goal wasn't just survival anymore, it was infection. They began hijacking Zathari transmissions, not to beg or threaten, but to corrupt. They beamed out human emotions, music, grief, porn laughter, political rants, childhood traumas, screaming matches between divorced parents, TikTok dances stitched into funeral montages. They sent out Earth, raw and unfiltered, to everyone. Any race within signal range would receive it, like a virus in a bottle, floating through space. And some of them listened. One Zathari ship, orbiting Jupiter as a monitoring vessel, intercepted a rogue Contagion broadcast. Within hours, 3 crew members had disobeyed orders. Within days, the ship self-destructed. Earth had become a psychological weapon, not just in defense, but in offense. Because the greatest threat humanity posed wasn't its guns, it was its existence, its ideas, its madness as a form of freedom. Varek, the war priest who now ruled the Zathari fleet, declared Earth a Class Z containment zone. He argued that no further invasion was necessary. But some disagreed. There were those within the Zathari who wanted revenge, who wanted closure, who couldn't sleep knowing a small blue planet had mocked their empire and walked away laughing. These were the ones who formed the Purge Choir, a splinter faction. No orders, no ranks, just ships and hate. They began planning a final attack, not to conquer, not to cage, but to annihilate. A strike so devastating Earth wouldn't be left to rot. It would be forgotten. Completely. And their first target? Jack Merrick? The voice that wouldn't die. The ghost in their machine. They didn't announce their arrival. The Purge Choir came without warning, slipping past orbit beacons and satellite wreckage like shadows in deep water. These weren't like the Zathari ships Earth had seen before. They were sleeker, silent, pulsing with a red hue that didn't just reflect light, it bled it. Jack Merrick didn't need radar to know they were coming. He felt it. He was at the top of a bombed-out church tower in Brazil, leaning on the twisted iron cross for balance, eyes staring at the night sky. The jungle stretched out below him, quiet, coiled, tense. And then the stars began to move. Not fall, not blink, just move, slow, calculated, predatory. He keyed the radio on his hip. "They're here!" Across 1,000 miles of jungle, desert, ruins, and swamps, every resistance cell tuned in. No fancy encryption, no code names, just Jack's voice, rasped and weathered, cutting through the static like a blade. "They're not here to fight. They're here to erase." He paused, voice lowering. "So make damn sure you give them something they'll never forget." The first strike hit Caracas. The city never screamed. It simply dimmed. Lights gone, radios dead, bodies frozen where they stood, eyes open, pupils dilated. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a virus. It was fear, weaponized. A psychic wave so strong it disconnected the soul from the flesh. People didn't fall. They stopped. In Peru, the jungle died. Every leaf turned black. Birds fell mid-flight. Animals tore their own skin apart trying to flee from a presence they couldn't see. By dawn, it wasn't war. It was extinction in slow motion. And Earth was losing. Not because it lacked weapons, but because no one could aim when your brain was unraveling inside your skull. The Purge Choir didn't even deploy troops. They just hovered, like judgment given form, and watched the world unravel itself. Jack Merrick didn't fall back. He climbed down the church, coughing blood, vision swimming, head pounding with pressure that felt like his brain was trying to boil. Harper met him at the base. She was thinner now, meaner. scar across her cheek from the last Zathari drone strike. "You can't fight this," she said. "This isn't a battle. It's a damn exorcism." Jack staggered forward. "Then we become the demon they can't burn." She stared at him. "You've lost your mind." "Good," he growled. "Means I've got nothing left to lose." He looked to the jungle beyond. The last operating contagion broadcast tower sat there, half covered in vines, its antenna crooked but functional. They could run, or they could broadcast. Jack chose the second. He called it Operation Spite. There would be no surrender, no suicide plans, no counterfleets, just one final scream into the abyss, a data wave, faster than light, encoded with Earth's worst, every betrayal, every genocide, every love story that ended in violence, every memory that still haunted humanity like a wound that refused to scab. They fed it all into the tower. And they didn't clean it up. They didn't sanitize it. No triumph. No redemption arcs. Just the raw, bleeding core of the species. United States, as we really were. They hooked Jack into the system. His brain would carry the charge. His mind, already half infected with Zathari tech, would be the ignition point. Doctors begged him not to. Harper begged him not to. But Jack looked at the last working mirror in the bunker and said, "They want us forgotten? Then they'll remember this scream forever." He laid down on the table, electrodes in his skull, blood dripping from his nose. A priest stood in the corner, not to offer prayers, but to record them. As the purge choir descended over the Amazon, ready to detonate their final pulse, the tower in the jungle lit up. One red flash, one deafening surge. And the signal launched. The Zathari ships froze, sensors overwhelmed, AI cores rupturing, emotions they didn't even have flooding in. Shame, lust, rage, failure, love, addiction, suicide, memory. All of it screaming into their hive minds like a plague of voices shouting at once, "Remember us!" One ship turned on another. Cannons fired without orders, a psychic meltdown so massive it looped back into their own fleet. Their purge weapon, ready to discharge, shorted out in mid-charge and exploded inside its own casing. The sky over the Amazon didn't just flash. It bled. One ship fell into the sea off the coast of Chile. Another crashed into the Andes. 3 vanished entirely, either cloaked or dead in orbit. Earth didn't cheer. It collapsed. But it collapsed with middle fingers pointed at the stars. Jack Merrick didn't die. Not technically. His body went limp. His brain shut down. He stopped breathing for 11 minutes. But then his fingers twitched. Then his eyes blinked. And he whispered, "Was that loud enough?" The Zathari called off the purge choir missions. Not because of losses, but because the signal spread. One of their relay ships caught the human scream and relayed it into deep space before it realized what it was doing. Other species heard it, and for the first time, they didn't fear Earth. They understood it, not admired, not welcomed, but understood. A planet where madness had meaning, a species that bled stories, that weaponized memory, that laughed while burning. Jack Merrick's name became a virus across the stars, not a hero, not a villain, just a man too broken to stop screaming. And they say that even now, if you tune to the right frequency at night, you can still hear him laughing in the static. It ended not with parades, medals, or televised speeches. It ended in silence. A silence that stretched across galaxies, thick and choking. The kind of silence that comes after something sacred and terrible has been witnessed. Something that stains memory and soul alike. The Zathari left Earth's orbit entirely 3 weeks after the collapse of the purge choir. They didn't send ambassadors. They didn't issue apologies. They didn't return fire. They simply vanished, retreated beyond the rim of human knowledge, sealing off their wormholes behind them like a wounded animal crawling into a cave to die. For the first time in human history, the sky was empty, and Earth didn't trust it. Jack Merrick never fully recovered. His body moved, his voice rasped, his eyes opened, but something behind them had stayed inside the machine, inside the scream he'd fed into the stars. He spent his days wandering the jungles near the ruined broadcast tower, talking to people who weren't there, and muttering lines that sounded like poems until you listened close and realized they were battle reports twisted into lullabies. Harper stayed near him, not out of loyalty, not out of duty, but because somewhere in all that madness, she found a thread of truth that kept her breathing. "Do you know what you are to them?" she asked him once, sitting beside a small fire under the ruined canopy of leaves scorched by alien heat. Jack stared into the flame. "A virus." Harper shook her head. "You're a mirror. That's what scares them. Not who we are, but the fact that they saw a piece of themselves in us, the part they buried, the part they forgot." Jack didn't answer. He just looked at the stars with tired eyes and whispered. They blinked first. Rebuilding didn't begin for months, not because people couldn't, but because they didn't know how. The world wasn't broken the way it had been after wars before. It wasn't cities and governments that needed rebuilding. It was meaning. It was belief. In systems, in hope, in each other. Some nations refused to reform. They splintered into tribes, communes, and city-states. Others built new orders from scratch, rewriting history and burning books as if forgetting would spare them from the next sky-born horror. But the contagion, Jack's old network, didn't fade. It evolved. They turned into something more. Something quiet, rooted, watchful. They built memory towers across the globe, black stone monoliths carved with the names of the lost, the damned, the insane, and the brave. Not in any one language, in all of them. Even the Zathari dialects, crudely scratched in by those who learned just enough to say, "We were here." People visited in silence, laid down stories like offerings. No priests, no gods, just memory. 20 years passed. Children grew up with stories of the laughing sky, of Earth's scream, of Jack Merrick, the man who made the galaxy step back. They didn't paint him as a savior. They didn't worship him. They feared him. But it was a respectful kind of fear, the same way you might fear the ocean, or fire, or madness itself. Because Jack had shown humanity's rawest face to the stars, and dared the stars to look away. And they had. He died alone, beneath the ruins of the old church tower in Brazil. Harper found him days later, sitting upright against the stone, eyes open, mouth set in a faint smile. There was no blood, no struggle, just stillness, like the fight had finally let go, like madness had shaken his hand and said, "Well played." They buried him beneath the church, no stone, just a metal plaque with 4 words scratched into it. He never shut up. In time, alien signals returned, not from the Zathari, from others, different species, some curious, some cautious, a few sympathetic. They didn't speak of alliance or treaties. They didn't offer gifts. They just said one thing. "We heard you." Earth didn't respond right away, because it didn't trust the stars anymore. But it didn't hate them either. It just watched, and waited, and laughed. Because laughter on Earth had never just been joy. It had been a weapon, a refusal, a battle cry wrapped in absurdity. And now the galaxy knew it. Now they all knew what Earth truly was. Not the strongest, not the wisest, not the purest, but the last species you should ever try to erase. Because humans don't go quietly. They go screaming, broken, laughing, and throwing middle fingers until the universe either kills them or starts laughing too, and even then, they come back, to tell the story.